Sorry about that. Today we are in a new chapter. Woohoo! We are
Mhm.
in Hebrews chapter 12. If you want to make your way over there, we've been doing a lot of Hebrews 11 took a while. There's a lot of Old Testament references that we kind of went through, and we didn't even go through all of them. But there's a lot there talking about all of the different examples of faith. And now the author of Hebrews is kind of switching gears and telling us, now that I've told you about all of these examples, here's what you should do. So this is the good stuff. So we're going to be in Hebrews 12, and let's see. Uh, Tim, what version are you reading this morning?
The net.
Okay, can you read verses one through two? I'm hoping for getting a different translation. See what happens here.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such great cloud of witnesses, we must get rid of every weight and the sin that clings so closely and run with endurance the race set out for us, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set out for him, he endured the cross, disregarding his shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God.
Very interesting. Good. The words that were used in some of that are like completely different than what are in my Bible. So that's interesting. I like that. We're gonna have to talk about some of those soon. But let's start. Uh Eric, were you trying to say something?
What version was that?
The
The net.
net.
What's the net? Who?
I think it was written by LeBron. Is that right? No. I don't know
What's
anything about the net.
New English translation, isn't that right?
Tim? Yeah.
I am I don't know a whole lot about this. I refer back to it. I had a teacher, a Bible scholar that used to use it a lot. So sometimes
Okay.
I take a peek at it. I can search some information. I'll put it in the chat.
There's a
It's
woman named Lynette that wrote this, and
Yeah,
it's Lynette,
but
that
I'm
was much better than my basketball joke.
I was gonna say, ask Roger Federer, right?
That's right. That was good. Yeah, I liked there was some very different some different words in there. So this is going to be, I think, a fun conversation because some of this I was going through. I'm like, this is I started looking at the definition of the words. I'm like, this could go in a lot of different directions. Let's see how it goes. Rich, we're in Hebrews chapter 12. We just read verse 1 and 2. And we're starting verse 1. It says, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And so, just a couple of points that we want to bring up here is it starts with the therefore. And this is because, like I mentioned at the introduction, we just talked about all of these examples of faith. And now he's switching to, okay, now this is what you do. So this is good. This is the application side of all of those uh, examples and the different things that we learn from there. So this is good. And it's really interesting because the first couple times I read this, I totally got this backwards. It says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And when I read that, my mind is thinking, okay, there's this cloud of witnesses that are watching what we're doing. And that was my impression of this verse. But this is actually the opposite. We have so many people that we've seen. This is the cloud of witnesses that we've seen them as an example. This is what we should do. So I like this. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. And it's interesting that verse 1, he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and then he tells us what we should do with this. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And we're going to look at a lot of the different cool things that he says, or she, whoever the author of Hebrews says in here. Um, and we want to look at that, but I just want to point out something really important here, which is he doesn't tell us to have this great faith like all of those witnesses. And I think that that's really important. It's it's not an abstract thing, right? Because we saw all of these examples, they all experienced faith in a different way. He doesn't say, I'm sorry, I keep saying that. The author of Hebrews doesn't say, go have strong faith, go have this great faith. It's interesting to me that what the author says is, now that you've seen all these examples of faith, go do this. And I just think that this is incredible. I like what he's saying here. You'll have to forgive me with my pronouns. I know none of you probably even care, but I don't know who the author of Hebrews is. All right, so let's look at this first part. It says, "Let us lay aside every weight." And I think that was completely different than what Tim's Bible said. What was yours? It was like every something about sin, wasn't it?
We must get rid of every weight and the sin that clings so closely and run
Oh,
the
okay.
endurance that race set out for us.
Okay, so it was weight. Okay. So notice there's two things here that the author says, lay aside every weight and lay aside every snare of sin, or I can't remember exact wording that Tim's Bible said, but it's in your Bible, you can see it in your translation. But let's talk about weight first. What do you think it means to lay aside every weight? That's really interesting to me. What is a weight?
Well, if you're running a race and anything that hinders you, like carrying weight, would keep you from reaching your goal. So it's worldly things that we are taking with us.
Okay.
I think of
Go ahead.
the weight of sin. I think, the Bible refers a lot of times to the weight of sin that holds us back or holds us down.
All right.
Yeah, some of us feel like we're holding on to something of the past
Mhm.
that, oh, there's, I can't believe I did that. I'm a horrible person.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I think it's like guilt.
Like guilt.
That's
Okay.
really kind of what Charlie's kind of saying. It's just
Yeah.
the things of the past, lay that aside. It's all in the
Right.
past,
Right.
and all the temptations that are also there that draw us
Awesome.
back into that.
I'm gonna call it baggage.
Mhm.
Baggage. Ooh, I like that.
Baggage.
Yeah, that's good.
That just, I think, encompasses all of it.
Yeah.
Whether it's past or sin or it's
Okay.
that baggage.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind that the chapter breaks are arbitrary and they got this big, huge number between this and the last verse. It looks like a break, but it is a therefore.
Sure.
And it seems like, what did he go through in the last chapter? It was all about difficulties or not having the promise in hand or in sight. And so is it lay all doubt aside amid whatever difficulty and trouble? I mean, I see what is being discussed. That is clear, I think, that because he's stepping into it, but
Yeah.
this is one sentence. Lay aside any encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, which,
Yeah.
well, go ahead.
I
John.
was just gonna say, to me, it looks like two different things that the author's bringing up. There's the sin and entanglement, which we'll talk to next, but then there's the weight, which he doesn't really. It's metaphorical, so it's hard to nail down. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure because he's talking about sin that the author means, something related to sin. Maybe he does. Maybe the author does. But I wonder if maybe the author's just pointing out some other things that might slow us down.
Well, I think
Yeah.
since he turns into verse 2 into one of the great verses, it really does seem, keep your eyes on, sorry, the grounding verse
prize.
here is keep your eyes on Jesus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Look nowhere else. And even amid our Ecclesiastes study,
Yeah.
everywhere. especially not
So,
yourself. So,
in the NIV, it says, throw off everything that hinders.
Mhm.
So that, looking at it that way, anything in activities or anything we're doing in our life, anything that hinders us.
Yeah. And this is an interesting thing to bring up. I think it's an interesting thing to bring up because this is kind of relative. And let me just give you an example. The sin aspect of things is not relative. If you are disobeying God, you're disobeying God. If you're not following his will, you're in sin, right? But this weight, this might be relative because it might be a weight for some of us and it might not be a weight for others of us. And this is one of those interesting aspects where it's something that could weigh you down. And the idea here, because he mentions we're running a race, this is something that can slow you down. And there's a couple of problems with this, which is one, if you're running a race, you don't want to be slowed down. You want to win, so you're going to get rid of everything that can possibly. Some people have go crazy, right? I was in when I was in high school, I liked to run. I was in cross country and track, and we would be running these long distances like what was it, 3 miles. It was in cross country, and people would go crazy and they would like shave every part of their body, and they're like, oh, I'm getting rid of the air resistance so I can be much faster. I'm like, I'm not sure that that actually is gonna slow you down. I'm gonna beat you, and I'm gonna have all my hair. Just letting you know. So, but some people felt like it did. And so it's just interesting because I'm not sure that weight is the same for every single person. I don't know what you guys think about this. I just like this concept here.
I agree. It's, by the way, the word in the NASB is encumbrance.
Encumbrance, okay.
And I think this just, sir, back to this is worry not. This is fear not. This is be patient, wait, trust. Anything that because what is a weight and encumbrance when we get anxious about our current situation and looking forward to being out of it.
But let me
Go ahead. That's
I was just
fine.
gonna push a little bit more on this because I
Yeah.
think it also could be those things where we have our focus on the wrong thing, and so we're worried about the wrong thing. Like we're worried
Agreed.
about,
Agreed.
this particular thing happening in our life and the consequences of that, and God's saying you don't even think about that. Just don't worry
Huh.
about that and focus on something else.
You were pushing not back, but on my back. I'm with you, same direction.
Okay.
I mean, it is all. I mean, I just go back to even to the example of Abraham and Sarah taking things into their own hand and then worrying about the enemy. Calling her sister. These are the kinds of things that we do when we really do not trust God. Sorry. So I guess I've said it enough.
We've talked a lot of different things, and I'm curious if anybody has a concrete example of this.
I
'Cause we
really
haven't
think
really
that
given.
it's,
Go ahead.
I really think that it's all of the things we just discussed encompassed together because it goes on and says, looking to Jesus.
Mm,
Anything that takes us off the goal of this running the race, anything that takes us off it, which is all of these things we just talked about. Every single one of them gets your eyes off of what we're supposed to be doing. And these are all the things that ensnares us and causes us to not run with endurance. We doubt things. I mean, if, like you said, you're a runner, if you've ever run, you're not looking around to see what a beautiful day it is, and all this stuff. You're running to, there's a finish line and I want to get there. And that's what he's talking about. Anything that takes you off of that goal. And our goal is to go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son, the Father, all those good things that we're supposed to be doing. And anything that takes us off of that is a weight. It is a thing that we lose focus on everything, our day-to-day lives are. He's just saying, you gotta look at just that one goal. And I think we've encompassed everything that we've just said, whether it's baggage, guilt, whether it's, you know, anything that takes your eyes off of what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, go ahead, Rich.
sorry, John, I was gonna say, what's interesting to me is, and I don't know how runners back in their time trained, but you know, the other function of weight is actually training until race time, and then you leave that weight behind. I don't know where the application, and it's just really interesting to kind of think about it that way as well, because weights, when you're training for something, you know, it's good for you to kind of test your endurance, test your strength, push. But when it's race time, all that stuff gets put aside. And I don't know what the application is really. It's just that thought entered into my mind with some things that God allows in our lives to strengthen us, to build endurance, to build strength. But maybe we're in a constant race, and maybe this application's out of, you know. but in some sense, there's also a sense of there's a time in which we allow that weight to strengthen, to build, but then there's a time that our eyes are no longer on there, and we put it aside and we just focus on the race itself, because we know the training that we've also gone through with whatever weights that you might have put on. And I don't know if that's a, you know, direct application. I just thought that was an interesting thing when you consider weights and how they play into training for a race versus how, you know, you're supposed to cast them off when it's actually race
Yeah.
time.
There is a good point here, which you kind of are bringing up. Well, and maybe they're not exactly related, but they are in my brain, which is that you could technically finish a race carrying weights. You could technically win a race win the race while you're carrying weights. So there's a danger here of like, okay, this is weighing me down. I know it is, but it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And so there's a danger here of saying it's weighing me, but it's really not that much. It's not that big of a deal. I can still finish my race with doing this. And one of the other dangers here is we can have a weight on us where we think it's going to be okay, but it actually reduces our endurance so much where we can't finish our race. And so there's another aspect here. And so I like the analogy, the metaphor that he's using about where it's running a race. If you are, as you mentioned, training, you might wear those weights, but it might be so much that you don't actually finish your training session the way you wanted to. But if you're running the race, you don't want to wear those weights because you don't. Your goal is to win. It's not just to finish,
That's an
which we'll talk
interesting,
about in a little bit.
that's an interesting point, John. And if you equate it to how some people don't allow sin to be fully washed from their body, some people will carry sin, even Christians will carry sin along their whole life, and it robs them of finishing that race how God wants us to finish it. And it's unfortunate that sometimes we don't fully accept the effects of what Christ did on the cross in the way that we look at our past sin. And we don't completely shed that, and we do carry, and that's a great metaphor that you said, because it weighs us down, and we may finish the race, we probably will, but once we're there, God's going to be like, child, why didn't you accept everything I gave you? And that's kind of sad, and I think we all do it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
We have a coach, the Holy Spirit.
Yes, right.
This is stretch the analogy too. If you're a biker, whatever, you're trying to shed every ounce of weight, or backpacker, because after, 2 miles, no problem. After 20 miles, you start to feel the pain of an extra ounce of water in your hand. It's, I'm sorry, it's just stretching the analogy. I just feel like this is now one of those analogies of salt and light. It's powerful. It's the opposite.
I mean, John, you were asking for a practical example. I was just trying to think through, like, I've seen guys, they're gifted in whatever it is, and God has gifted them to do certain things, but there are things in the past that automatically in their minds disqualify them. Even though some people, they did this before receiving Christ, some after. I like, for example, again, this is not always the case, but a divorced person. I've seen them, they're like, I failed at my marriage already. I have no authority or be able to move forward or even counsel or teach or mentor others in their marriage. That's something where I think we can grow from it, whether that was our fault or not or whatever. But sometimes that kind of background weighs on somebody that they automatically disqualify, even though they learn from that, should be able to move forward for the glory of God and magnifies the grace of Christ that can wash that all away and help us. But then there's that weight of, I can't speak on this because I've already failed previously, on that particular topic. It's just really, I've talked to guys like that, and there's so much wisdom to share, but they're just like, I'm not going to speak on it simply because I failed, even though they've been, it was after they became believers.
Yeah, it's a
just
good example.
Really interesting.
I can give a silly example as well, and I've actually seen this with some people, and that could be the car you drive. I knew a guy who, God blessed him financially. Honestly, he has a super tough life, so I'm not wanting to trade places with him, but in that aspect, God totally blessed him, and so he could have a really nice car, but he got to a point where he's like, I can't have a nice car, and it's like, okay, I get it. Some of us, I don't care about cars. I could have a nice car, I wouldn't care. It would not be a hindrance for me, but for some people, that might be a hindrance for them. That might be a weight. And that's a silly example, not as deep as Rich's example, but it's still a possibility.
Oh, I think that's a real example for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a pretty common golden calf, I think, today.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for some, they have the freedom to do it, I
Yeah.
don't know that they actually, idolize any of it. It's just God's blessed me and I could buy a, Mercedes, whatever,
Yeah.
right? S55 AMG. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that, even though I
Yeah.
spent 120 grand. And I don't care, but for some people that would be you drive out into the church, you're gonna get stares, you're gonna cause stumbling, and some
Yeah.
people can't get over that. Say why, so it's an interesting example.
Well, I'm guilty as charged. I had a very nice car and I really enjoyed driving it. And God told me that it was prideful and I sold it.
Then I don't have a big golden calf. I have thousands of little calves.
Yep.
But you can melt them down.
And they're silvers. And they're
That's right.
silver, not
Make
gold.
something big out of it.
Or they're lead just to make something heavy. Yeah. All right. So this was the weight. He said, let us lay aside every weight. And then it's and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And Tim, could you read yours again one more time? Because I like the way the net had put that.
We must rid of every weight and sin that clings so closely and run the endurance race that's set out for us.
That clings so closely.
I
Interesting.
just,
Yeah.
Are you coming through to everyone faintly, Tim? Barely hear you.
That I cannot answer. I don't know what
Ooh.
to hear.
Yes.
He is a little quieter than normal. Yes.
My eyes may be good, but my ears are. Oh, turn up.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. 1,
Uh,
2, 3.
Just
You're a
to-
little quiet.
Sorry
You're a
to
little quiet.
disrupt.
A little quiet. Speak up, Tim.
No, but we heard you. So
Make some. Sorry.
I've
The
never been
question
accused-
is-
never been accused of that.
So the question that we're looking at is, we looked at the weight, and now let's look at the sin which I can't remember. Was it surrounds us on every side? Is that what it was?
Cling
Something
so
like that.
closely.
Clings so closely. Sorry, when I looked it up, it was surrounds us on every side. Clings so closely. So what do you think that we're just that the author is talking about here? These are things that might and interesting in mine it says ensnare us. So the idea is it's not just going to slow you down, it's going to like stop you or majorly slow you down. What do you think the author's talking about here?
I think of it as a wet shirt that it becomes part of you, and it's very difficult to remove it. And it takes, sometimes you pull muscles when you remove it as you get older.
Someday you'll have to tell me that
I
story.
think of it,
Yeah,
I think of it as this, that each and every one of us have different sins that are difficult for us today. There are, many, each and every one of us has something that, oh man, I can't believe I did it again. There's that sin, whatever it be, that ensnares us and keeps us close. And that's what it's saying, is those are the ones you have to concentrate on and make sure that you get ready to run the race. I mean, that's what he's talking about. So each and every one of us, whether it be alcohol or sex or, pornography or any of those things, for some of us, like, well, that's not a problem for me, but there's other things that are.
Yeah.
And so we need to really acknowledge what those are. And that's the one we have to be careful about, is what easily or clings to us. In other words, it's right there. You can, with the snap of a finger, you could be into that sin, where other people it's not. So it's being cognizant of what that sin is, because it's so close to us.
But if you go
Hey,
back to your car example, pick on the car again, you nice shiny new car and you drive it through the mud, and all the stuff, all the mud and junk and everything else that clings to it, and your car's nice and shiny new, it's nice and aerodynamic, but you load it full of mud and then you lose some of that aerodynamic ability and just the kind of the thought of clinging to us, and how hard is it to get it off? I mean, sometimes it can be pretty tough to get that stuff off there. And it's true in our lives.
Well, maybe it's even just stay away from the mud.
No, mud's too fun. That's too fun. You can't get away from that.
Well, when a muddy Jeep drives through town, they think it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, dude, that's
Why
what I
do you have a
want.
Jeep if you're not gonna drive in the mud? Anyway, it's interesting to me here, John, it says, lay aside every weight. So there's a whole bunch of weights.
Yeah.
And the sin, that's singular, the sin.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of weights, but there's only the sin, which so easily besets us.
Yeah. And I think this is pointing back to what Sean was saying, Dad, which is for each of us, it might be different, but there's something that we need to make sure we stay away from.
Yeah.
I like the contrast here also between this and the next verse of looking unto Jesus, because in my mind, when I'm reading this, it is you're following Jesus and then you see a sin which causes you to change direction and follow something else, which means you're not really running your race much anymore. And then and the way to fix that is to repent, which means to turn and follow Jesus again. So I like the picture that is here, which is if you are keeping your eye on something that you find shiny, you're not keeping your eye on the Lord.
So yes, it's all the same in the end, no matter how it manifests. And just I think for me, the greatest demonstration of lack of faith is where I seek rest, where I seek pleasure or joy. What do I want to do with my free time? And it's generally still in the old world habits, much of it. Sure, I'm just trying to illustrate it. It's just you know, I want to go, listen to music. Or watch something for that matter. It's whereas the time is much better spent in prayer or the word, and I think mostly prayer is where it's healthiest. It's that to me that's it is, man, it is essentially a lack of trust in God for me. If I strive for something else other than Him, if I strive for things and distractions or whatever.
So I think I like what you're saying. I think you're saying that you might find your rest in something where you think you should be finding your rest in God, but
Mhm.
you're like, I'm gonna actually find my rest over here and go in there. And it's not really as fulfilling, but that's the lack of faith, is if you actually were to go and find your rest in the Lord. I think that's
Yeah.
is that what you're saying?
That which is not becomes yet another little encumbrance or a big one.
Yeah.
It actually hurts in the long run. So yeah.
I like it. All right, so we're looking at the verse, and let's get through the last part of the verse, and then we got to talk about verse 2 because that one's really cool. But it says, "Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." So there's two other aspects of this that we want to look at real quickly, or maybe not quickly, I don't know, which is endurance and race. And the endurance aspect of it, I love this. I love the fact that God does not ever do a bait and switch with us. He's not ever like, come follow me, it'll be easy and fun. He says, come follow me, it'll be rewarding and hard. Right? And so I like that there's this phrase here of endurance. This is something that takes endurance. This is a difficult thing. And for our culture, endurance is like a super difficult thing, right? Running a long distance, for a lot of people, it's not even possible. They're like, I can't even do it. And really, I don't know where I'm going with this. I lost my train of thought, but this is just a really interesting thing, that this is what God is saying, that it's going to take endurance, and I love that, and I love the next verse, which helps us with that. But just so we're clear, this is what God's calling us to, a race that's going to take endurance, and so we can all understand that, and I love that He tells us this. Then the second part is he talks about it's a race, endurance, the race that is set before us. And so, like I mentioned before, I used to do a lot of running. I used to do a lot of long distance type of running. I liked races; those were fun. Um, but we got to ask the question: what is this race that the author is talking about? What does it mean that we're running a race? And I specifically, I have two questions for us. Is it possible to win the race? And is it okay to just finish the race and not win the race? Because I'm bringing this up because when I was younger, I did a lot of fun runs. My dad did them as well, and he would get us to do them. And even today, there's a lot of runs, public runs and public races that people do. And for a lot of people, the goal is just to finish. It's not actually to win. I'm not built that way. I don't want to finish. I want to win. But I'm just curious, is finishing without winning, is that okay? What do you guys think about this race?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, just the word race, and part of it was, yeah, the goal is to finish first and to finish as fast as possible. But then I started thinking about the races that I've competed in and knowing good and gosh darn well I wasn't going to finish, but it was just to make sure that I either beat the person I was running with. And then, I did that marathon and my goal was just to finish. And all of those, I felt that it was successful just because I was running the race. And the fact that I was in the competition and running the race was better than just being a spectator sitting on the sideline and watching people go by. So I think if I had to choose between one or the other, I'd rather be a participant in the race, whether I won or not, than a spectator.
Winning is nice, but what is worse? Giving up or making it through to finish.
Different people have different talents. And for some people, just to finish the race is an amazing thing. For other people, winning the race isn't that hard. I mean, they're gifted. I mean, when John was running and I was running, we're running the same 10K, and he would finish a couple of minutes ahead of me. And when I finished, I couldn't even breathe. I mean, I'd just be going, and he'd be, "Hi, Dad, how you doing?" "Oh, yeah, it was a good race." "Yeah, well, it was okay." And I'd be, it's different talents, different skills, different abilities. And so for some people, winning the race, yeah, they should win. For other people, finishing the race, yeah, they should finish.
Yeah, guys
I
finish.
think that the important part for me is that's set before us. So each and every one of us has a different race. We're not competing against each other. We're actually, it's our race, and it's whatever God puts before us, which is, we're talking about faith. It's continuing on, because that's why he goes on to say, looking unto Jesus. That's where our strength is. That's
Yeah,
how we're gonna finish. We're gonna finish it well because of the race that's put before us. Each of us have our own trials and tribulations and sins that ensnare us and the weights that we carry. That's the race that's put before us. And that's where we have this, the only way we can do it is by focusing on Jesus. I know I'm jumping ahead, but that's really where we have to look at is the
How can you
race
get away
that's set
from it?
before us. It's before us. It's each and every one of us has a different race. So we're not competing against anybody but ourselves and who we are and how we're going to deal with it.
I agree with all that, and I think this is the race is the right word, but there an alternate word for this is battle that appears
Conflict.
in another translation here.
Yeah.
And it's more consistent because rerun the battle doesn't make sense, but battle makes more sense when we look at it really the way Sean was even saying it. And who is the enemy? Right? It's not the person next to you running the race with you. If it's a race, it's the enemy.
And if you think about races, I don't know how if any of you have been in any long distance endurance races. What really turns out is you're the enemy, because towards the end you get to a point where it's all in your head. It's just, I've decided I'm going to keep going, and your body is saying, no, it's time to stop, and you're like, nope, I'm still going. And so it's all internal, and that's really where the fight is. It's an internal fight. It's less about being the physical fight.
That's wonderful. And it comes back to, where do you regain that confidence to go that last 2 miles after that difficult 20 to whatever?
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know if it was brought up here, but even I guess the woman who crossed or swam the channel the first time, I don't know, it's or somewhere, maybe it was Catalina Island, that she stopped a mile or half mile. I don't know what it was, but
because of the fog.
because she had she had no idea where it was, how far. I guess this was in a sermon, but I mean that says a lot. Like for me, I'm not a big bike rider, but the first time I attempted a hill here that I thought I would never even try, but I had no option but the bike ride. I couldn't walk. I stopped a quarter mile from the end because it was around the curve and I had no idea how long it was. But these days I know exactly how long it is. And I know that it's just around the corner. It's become no more easy, really. Slightly, yes. But in the head, I know exactly what's going on and no worries anymore.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's a great example.
As you know, because you know what's coming, you know what gears to get into, don't you?
Yes.
I can add to that the importance of having a support group by your side. I've done many 200 250-mile bike rides. And I could have never completed them without my riding buddy next to me, who, like Eric, and you just said, John, your body gives up, and you everything's telling you to stop, and finally your head gives in. But if you have someone next to you, cheering you on or pulling you or taking the lead, and I kind of equate that to the group that we have here. If we're a Christian and we stumble and fall, and our church group comes alongside of us and supports us, how much easier it is to pick back up or keep going.
I'm a little
And that
bummed. I'm
is the
looking at the
yoke.
time. Yes,
That's
yes.
the
No,
yoke.
you're right. I'm a little bummed. I'm looking at the time, and I wanted to spend most of our time on verse 2, and I'm looking at we only have 10 minutes left. So I guess we'll start touching it, but I think we'll have to finish it next week. But before we do that, verse 2, it says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. I want to tell you a little story, kind of funny, maybe sad, depending on how you want to look at it. I mentioned that I was I like to run. When I was in high school, I was in track, I was in cross country. And when my sister joined high school, she heard about how much I loved doing this, that she decided to do it as well. So she joined our cross country team. And we had a race, I remember, and I remember seeing this whole thing happen. It was a little strange. We had a race. She's a freshman, so it's a 2-mile race in cross country, and we're at a park. There's lots of trees, lots of paths all over, and there's markers telling you where you have to go to follow the race. And I'm talking about this because there's this part in the verse about looking unto Jesus, and I just want to stress how important this is. So she's in the race. She's actually in first place. She's ahead of everybody, and she's running this race, and she's not paying attention to where she's going, and she just keeps following the path she's on. Well, there's a marker saying that the race goes to the left. So she goes straight, and what happens is a group of people are watching her, and they follow her. And so like there's this whole chunk of the race that starts going in this other direction. And then there's other people where they just whoop, they turn left and they go. And what happens is they realize they're off. Eventually they realize they're not following the right path. So they've got to turn around, come back to the path and finish the race. And needless to say, they did not win. So I just think that this is an interesting visual that I actually saw where she was in first place, was not paying attention to looking at where she needed to go, not looking at the goal, and she went the wrong way and lost the race because of it. And so I'm just bringing that up because this is so important. This part in verse 2, looking unto Jesus. If our goal is to follow Jesus and we're not looking to him, I don't know what you expect is going to happen, right? And this is one of those things that can happen in lots of different ways, where God can be telling us, "Hey, we're going to go over here," and so you're like, "Okay," and you start heading straight there. And he's like, "No, wait, we're going in this direction first." You know, you can get ahead of Jesus even, and again, if you're not looking at him, then you're going the wrong way. And so I just think that this is so important and such a critical point of this looking unto Jesus. I don't know what you guys think about this, but it's just such a good picture where we can miss everything if we're looking in the wrong place. Do you guys have any other thoughts about this?
Well, I think about the analogy you just used with your sister and those runners that essentially they got off the path, but they got right back on and ended up finishing the race, right? And they didn't necessarily win, but they didn't quit.
Yep, that's true.
And then I thought you were talking about getting ahead of Jesus. Well, you can't really follow someone if you're ahead of them. So you got to kind of pace yourself, right?
Yeah.
And also that example you gave, the other runners followed her.
Yeah.
So they were misled by her. And
Yeah.
They
that
weren't
was-
looking at the finish line either. They were looking at the
Right.
person in front of them.
It's
right.
quite
And
likely
that's a
somebody,
perfect example that we shouldn't follow others. We should follow Christ
Yeah.
and not be misled by other runners.
or somebody on the side saying you're going the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
like Tim was. Just looking at verse 1 again, it doesn't say win the race, it says finish. Right? So that goes back to your question, and I'm sorry if somebody else had already brought that up, but it's just sinking into me. It's finish the race, not win the race.
I think that the winning is the finishing. I think that's where that is the key thing. And I think if we want to be more clear, the finishing and the winning of the race is actually reaching Jesus. If we're looking unto him, that's the goal. That's if we get to him, then we won. He's the
Well,
prize.
Not to
I don't know, I look at it
participation
differently.
award. It's Jesus.
I look at it differently because it says, run with endurance the race set before you. So
Yeah.
to me, the finish line is not really there. It's moving because some of us may live 60 years old, some may live 102. It's that there is no finishing until,
Perfect.
it's just, you gotta run the race with
Yeah.
endurance because you don't know how long it is. I mean, just like you
Amen.
guys were saying is, you don't know where the end is or the end of that hill or any of that stuff. There is nothing about finishing. It says you just gotta run with endurance.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Jesus
Thanks
is
for
gonna
correcting
finish it for you.
And to Bill's point too, which goes along with what you're saying, Sean, which is you don't want to follow somebody else who you're looking at and you're like, oh yeah, they're way more spiritual than me. They're way much further ahead in their race. You don't want to necessarily follow them. Not saying you shouldn't follow them, but you need to follow Jesus. And if sometimes God takes us in different directions, and this is a interesting part because we don't want to finish. We don't want to run somebody else's race. We want to run our race.
Yeah, take a
That's
turn
why
where you
it's-
saw that Ferrari a mile ahead of you, take a right.
And that's where a lot of people fall because a lot of people are hurt by the church because they're following people, not Jesus. And that's really where we run into problems is, I was hurt by the church because the pastor did this or somebody in the church said this or whatever, because they're following people and not Jesus. And that's where we really this is really important, looking unto Jesus. It's
Yeah.
not people, it's Jesus.
And it's critical that the leader understand that as well.
Yeah.
That story you told John, Junior's sister going the wrong way. The interesting thing to me is that they were willing to say, hey, we're going the wrong way, and then turn around, which is the only option they really have is to turn around and go back.
Yeah.
You can't keep going the wrong way and say, oh yeah, I know I'm going the wrong way, but I'll get to the finish line eventually. No.
Yeah.
And people would have given up. Oh, we lost. We're done. Let's go back to our car or wherever.
Right. The only way to finish the race is to turn around and go back,
Yeah.
get back on the track.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Sean, thanks for recalibrating the word to just run it, not finish, not win. And I think that
Yeah.
really is it. We don't know how long it is. We don't know how long we'll go through this or that. And that is really the test of trust. And the strength is
Yeah.
being able to keep walking when you find yourself in hell, keep walking. No, sorry, that's
And that's really the other thing about, to kind of add on to what Dan was saying is those people had to turn around, which for us, that's to repent. And to turn around and go in the other direction and finish with endurance.
I
Get
love
back
it.
on track. How many times have I gotten off track? I can think of dozens of times I've gotten off track. I've gotten my mind on the wrong goals. I've set it on the wrong things and I had to stop and turn around and go back.
John, you said it months ago, is that you could run away from Jesus your entire life and take one step to get back to him. And
Yeah.
I just love that.
beautiful.
That is the awesome thing about repentance, right? Anybody can do it from wherever you're at. You're not getting in too deep. You can always repent and turn to him.
All that matters, you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. All
That
right.
even fits the wow. You really rack this analogy, but it works. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
One verse, but it's a long verse.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah,
I mean,
this is great.
we're not done the sentence, by the way.
No, we're not.
That's
And I'm excited to talk about the author and the finisher of our faith. That's going to be a great conversation too, right? That Jesus is amazing. What he does for us is incredible. So
That'll be 2 more weeks. Yeah.
maybe.
Well, I
All right.
hadn't been here a few weeks, and I opened my bookmark. You're still on the same. Yeah.
Oh. All right. Well, I mean, if anybody has another comment, we have time for it. Otherwise, we can close up. So give you a moment to speak if you have something. All right. Well, then let's wrap it up. Bill, would you mind praying for us? Oh, before you do that, could you pray for Sean? He just left. He's next week, he's going to have another, I think it's next week. He's going to be talking with his doctor. He's losing his voice and they're trying to figure out what's going on.
Okay.